Good afternoon, everyone. Glad that you are tuning in, taking part in our daily devotional series. I am so thankful, grateful um, for Brock stepping in yesterday and presenting some things he's been thinking about. Really appreciate him doing that, and certainly we are very blessed in our congregation with some wonderful men serving as elders, and we're thankful for all of them and for all of their work that they're doing as we are going through this unprecedented time together. As we begin today, for our third through sixth graders, we want to continue asking them some questions concerning what are some things they know about. I'll share with you a couple of things that our kids have been noticing when we've gone through these things. It's been interesting to notice what immediately jumps out at them. For instance, when we asked them a couple of nights ago about what did they know about the 12 sons of Jacob, it was interesting that they focused on the discord between the brothers and Joseph and Benjamin even, and how Jacob favored them and what that caused. And we sort of talked about how that you kind of understood why the brothers felt that way, even though you don't agree with what they did. You kind of understood that when there's a favorite and things are done that way, that sometimes that can cause problems. So it's just interesting to note what it is that grabs your kids' attention concerning these different Bible characters. And so tonight's no different. We want you to ask them what are three things they know about Moses. And obviously there's a lot of life there to cover. Three major sections of Moses' life. You could do it that way. Maybe you could say, tell me something from the first 40 years. Tell me something from the second 40 years, and then tell me something from the last 40 years. Might be a good challenge for some, especially for some of our older kids. As far as our devotional goes, we are going to look at, we're going to continue our study on Christian evidences. And just as a reminder, sort of why are we doing this? Well, we talked an extended period of time about the fact that for many of us who wholeheartedly believe in God, we have no issues talking about the existence of God. We, as a matter of fact, sometimes sort of gloss over this because we believe. And we talked about at length how maybe this is just reassurance for you, but it might help you in having pieces of conversation to deliver to others as you're talking to them. That's the way I've begun looking at this. Is it's more of a challenge for me now to have enough information in the back of my head or in my brain that when I sit down to talk with somebody, I can continue the conversation beyond just the sort of the skin deep questions. For instance, you may be having a conversation with someone in your family who has always gone to church, who has always believed in God, and now for the first time in their life they're having some doubt. Well, that's a completely different conversation than someone who proclaims that there is no God, or somebody who says they're an atheist. It's a different style, a different set of facts, a different set of information. And so I think this is beneficial, and that's what we've talked about at length. We talked last time about some of the objections to this question. This is sort of what we focused on last time. And just as a reminder, we kind of looked at the idea that somebody might look at you and say, well, we can't know anything for sure, so we can't know about God. Or, look, if you have to say you have faith in something, well, then that sort of makes it impossible for you to state fully and 100% certain that you can know God exists. Or maybe we can't know God exists because he can't be experienced by the senses. Or maybe we can't know God exists because, well, man is just so corrupt. And so anyway, we covered those four kind of in our study the other night. Don't want to rehash all of that, but just wanted to kind of bring that back up again, because what we're going to talk about today really is a great conversation piece for any of these questions. It's a great conversation piece for people who are in doubt. It's a great conversation piece for people who claim that God doesn't exist, and everywhere in between those two things. So I think this is a great argument for you to know and for you to feel confident in. And so that's kind of what we want to do today. And just to give it a name, you've probably heard it called argument for design, or the argument to design, or sort of those kinds of things. We're just calling it the design argument for our conversation today. Here is sort of where it comes from. It's based on the order and arrangement of the universe. And really, truthfully, there are only two possible explanations of the universe and man. Either it's God, which would insinuate intelligent will, or it's chance, which would insinuate non-intelligence. Now, I don't want you to read into this and take this into a conversation with someone who maybe doubts the existence of God. This is not calling them unintelligent. This is not calling them, lacking intelligence or not being smart. Certainly not calling names of any sort here. What we are suggesting is that for you to claim that there is a designer is to claim that there is an intelligent decision being made, a decision with information behind it being made to execute whatever it is. And if you're leaving things to chance, then what you are doing is you are removing the intelligent, knowledgeable decision, and you're simply allowing things to take place without any influence, without any information, without any background. So this is not in any way, shape, or form trying to say that someone is unintelligent or someone is not smart. What we're just simply saying is using this word intelligent is meaning knowledgeable, making a fact-based decision. So intelligent will would insinuate that God made a fact-based decision about creation and about humanity, etc. Whereas chance would basically remove that intelligent decision and just say whatever happens will happen. Okay, so we have a starting point for this argument. One of these verses, Psalm 19, we actually covered on Sunday night. For those of you that tuned in, we're thankful for that, certainly. But we want to start there, Psalm 19. These are great verses to mark in your Bible if you're having discussions with people, maybe with your kids, maybe as they're starting to kind of get into that age range where they start asking questions about the existence of God, about why they need to believe and why they need to do the things that we're asking of them in the church and those kinds of things, then these are a great set of verses for you to go to. Psalm 19, beginning in verse 1, the heavens declare the glory of God, the sky above, or the expanse, proclaims his handiwork. It goes on, verses 2 and 3 we talked about on Sunday night, that day after day, night after night, there is evidence being given. When you look up at night, if you walk out on a clear night, we're very lucky to live in a community that is sort of outside of any type of major city that would be lit up at all days and all nights and all hours. And so on a clear night, you can walk out of our house here in Rogersville, and you can walk down the steps of our back deck and stand out in our backyard, look straight up and see every star in the sky, it feels like. And because of that, you have to look at that and say, okay, I can understand. Let's just pause for a minute here on Psalm 19:1. If you look up and you see all those scattered stars all over the place, then someone could easily say, but see, look, there's no rhyme or reason. There's just star after star after star, and they're not really, in any sort of pattern. And then in the same breath, you could point and look at a constellation and say, well, then explain that. Explain how that fits together, and it's in a perfect setup, and it's easy to see, and it's easy to point out the order behind it. Something like Orion or the Little Dipper, or the Big Dipper, anything that you can see, a constellation of any kind, and say, well, how did that happen? Was that left to chance? Now, their argument would say, yes, of course it is. It just so happens it's just a coincidence. And we don't believe in that. We look at Psalm 19 and verse 1, and we say, the heavens declare the glory of God. Okay, here's another thing to consider. It's been sort of scientifically discussed and scientifically proven that if we were any closer in our pathway around the sun, the earth would get too hot and people would not be able to survive. And if we were to get any further away off of our pathway around the sun, it would be too cold and we would freeze to death. You think about it, could that happen by chance? I mean, by just accident, we wound up on the exact perfect plot line for humanity to be born, so many billions of years ago. It would be very hard to believe in that. But if you believe in chance only, then you have to believe in that as well. Psalm 139. Should be a familiar verse, hopefully, to you. Psalm 139, verse 14. I praise you, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, my soul knows it very well. Some translations say it this way: I praise you, for I am fearfully set apart. The idea being set apart for a purpose. If you've ever put anything together, if you've ever built anything for your house, built anything for your office, if you've put something together for your kids even, you know that nowadays when you open those boxes and you start to get things out, there's usually a set apart, individualized bag full of the nuts and bolts, the screws, the things that you're going to need to put this piece together. It's set apart for a purpose. It's so that you don't have to go hunt those pieces down in the box. It is put there in that bag and set apart for you to be able to find easily and use, set apart for a purpose. And that's the same terminology, the same thought process that's being used here in Psalm 139, which is that God fearfully and wonderfully created you. He set you apart. He set humanity apart for a purpose. It was a purposed creation. It was not by chance. It was not by accident. It was not by coincidence. It was done on purpose. Romans chapter 1 over in the New Testament, Paul makes a lot of the same kind of claims here. Romans chapter 1 verses 20 and 21. His invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, there's your word to underline there, have been clearly perceived from the creation of the world even. Ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made, they are without excuse. Although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking. Their foolish hearts were darkened. His invisible attributes. Now, here's the interesting thing about the way this is written. In some translations, they actually use the word, instead of perceived, they use the word seen, okay, which looks like, in sort of our English translation and our English understanding, that looks like a contradiction. To say that his invisible, and that means you're unable to see it, invisible attributes are clearly seen or clearly perceived, seems like a contradiction, but we know that's not true. We know that Paul is making the point that the things that we think would be invisible, he's made clear to us through what he's created. Therefore, sort of the struggle that the argument has here for those who believe in chance or coincidence is, well, if that's the case, if God has this eternal power and this divine nature, these invisible attributes, and I don't believe in that, how can you tell me that that's clearly seen? So you see the argument there, but again, Paul is making the point, Romans chapter 1, the same point that David made in Psalm 19 and Psalm 139. You see that point that's made there, that God is clearly seen. And we talked about the idea that one of the arguments would be that he can't be experienced with senses. Here's Paul directly opposing that view. He says, wait a minute, that's not true. In Psalm 139, you look at the very idea, we talked about it in our Sunday morning Bible class, about the birth of a newborn and what the feeling of love that goes through a parent. And when you understand all the things that have to go right for that child to be conceived and then born and be healthy, and even those children who do have struggles, the idea of life is just an astonishing thing, that God fearfully, wonderfully created us, that he's known us from the very beginning. You take that, you couple that with Psalm 19, the idea that you can look up and you can see in the heavens proof of God's existence. You take that, you put all of that with Romans 1, and you see Paul making that same declaration there. One other one in Acts chapter 14. Acts chapter 14 and verse 17. This was Paul again. This is at Lystra. This is after Paul and Barnabas have healed a man, and they've been referred to as gods, little g, mind you, but gods nonetheless. And Paul kind of says, wait a minute. That's not even close. Verse 15, he says, why are you doing these things? We're men of like nature with you. We bring you good news that you should turn from these vain things to a living God who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. In past generations, he allowed all the nations to walk in their own ways. Listen to verse 17 specifically. Yet he did not leave himself without witness. He did good by giving you rains from heaven, fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts with food and gladness. How about that? I mean, the very idea that this is, again, Paul making the point that God has not left us without witness. God has not left us without proof. So that's sort of the starting point. As far as the Bible goes, this is sort of the starting point. Here's some other parts of the argument. Basically, if you want to outline the argument for someone, you need these 4 points. And this follows logic, and this follows just typical rational thought. So even someone who is claiming that they don't believe in God, if you'll notice, we've taken even the name of God out of this. Not that we're not going to get there, certainly, in our discussion, but for someone who might be sort of a belligerent person towards the idea of God, this is an argument you can use with them. You can speak to them very clearly, and you can speak to them very directly without necessarily being accused of taking your Bible and trying to hit them over the head with it. It's a four-point argument. It's very easy to remember, very simple, but it's very effective. Number one, if there is order and arrangement in the world, then there is design. Number two, we know for a fact that there is order and there is arrangement. We can see that in pretty much everything. Number three, therefore, there is design. Okay, so if they've agreed to all that, which they have to, I mean, unless they're just going to stick their head in the sand and just totally refuse, regardless of any kind of proof, they're going to have to admit that there is order and there is arrangement in the world. Well, if that's the case, then there is design. And number four, if there is design, then there is a designer. Okay, so to make sure that we cover all of our bases here, we're going to give you some definitions to go by as well. Order, when we use the word order, it's what we mean by that is it's interrelated in such a way as to constitute regularity. Okay, so in other words, if you look at just your standard directions for something, do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. Okay, well, if you came back the next day and you did those four things again, you should get the exact same result. And the idea behind that, and it's sort of the basis for Henry Ford and the conveyor belt or the operating line, the machine line that he sort of made famous. That was the idea, was if we can get these machines to copycat those same actions day in and day out, then we can move quicker and we can make more and we can do more in a more efficient and effective way. Well, that's what order is by definition. It's just the idea of interrelated things that work in such a way to constitute regularity. Arrangement means the adaptation of parts to one another. It means to an end. Again, let's use something from our kind of our worldly look, maybe something like a jigsaw puzzle. When you take all those puzzle pieces and you start putting them together, eventually you get to the one giant picture. It's the arrangement of those pieces that give you the whole. If we use the word design, what we mean, simply put, is purpose or aim. That's it. That's what design means. It's something that was put together for a purpose or an aim. And then designer is the purposer, the one behind the purpose or the aim of whatever it is we're discussing. Okay, so as we close, this is again a great argument, and we don't. Let me say this as we kind of go into this last part. When we use the term argument, we're certainly not meaning an argument made out of frustration or out of disagreement. And what I mean by disagreement there is hostility. What we mean by argument is the way you're going to get people to buy in to the conversation is you're going to have to present to them information that, number one, is believable, number two, can be backed up, and number three, is done in the right attitude. If that sounds familiar, it should. It is our theme verse that we've quoted and we've said and we've used so many times during this study. It's 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared. Okay, so that's information that I have gone over and I've shown to be believable. To give an answer, to make a defense. In other words, it's got to have proof behind it. It can't simply just be information. It can't just certainly can't be my opinion. There has to be some proof behind it. And then you close out that verse, you do it with gentleness and respect. Okay, so This is a great when we say argument, that's what we're insinuating. That's what we're talking about, is the idea of a discussion, a ready defense, apologetics, not I am trying very hard to put you down because you don't agree with everything that I say. If that's the way you're presenting this, if that's the way you're going into discussions, I'm just telling you, you're driving people away. I would say even 90% of the time, that's what you're going to do, is drive people away. Whereas if instead you will sit with them and talk with them and explain to them and express and show proof, you've got a really good chance of at least getting into the conversation instead of being more entrenched in your own beliefs when you leave. That's what they're going to come into the discussion with, their own set of beliefs. And if you don't present them with evidence, if you don't present them with believable information, and if you don't show your proof, if you don't show your work, to kind of use the old school adage, then they're going to leave further entrenched in their own beliefs, and they're not going to listen to what you have to say. This is a wonderful discussion to have. And here's you a couple of illustrations that you can use. And I know that you've probably heard these before, but just as we close, here's sort of a review. A couple of illustrations to use. The likelihood of chance or coincidence bringing about the life that we have now. The two illustrations that are used most are the pocket watch and the shoebox. What that is if you took apart an old pocket watch and you took all those gears and you took all the screws and the pieces and all of those little pieces that all go into that shoebox or into that pocket watch. You took all those pieces out. Every last one of them, every last gear, and you put them into a shoebox and you begin to shake that shoebox viciously. The likelihood that you would bring out a perfectly working pocket watch is the same likelihood we have that chance created this universe that we live in. Okay, so think about that. Take all the things out of a pocket watch, put it in a shoebox, shake it up. Do you really think you're going to come out with a perfectly working pocket watch? And that's the same likelihood that we have chance has created our universe. Now, second illustration, sort of the same idea, is if a tornado blew through a junkyard, the likelihood that chance or coincidence is the reason why we have our universe is the same likelihood as the tornado going through the junkyard and spitting out on the other side a Boeing 747 jet that was ready to fly. Now, you use those arguments, you use those illustrations, but you better have some backup. You better have some proof. You better be ready for the questions that are going to be asked. For instance, we talked about this. The objections to this question, they're going to be very severe, and they're going to want an answer to these things. And you and I have to be prepared to give them an answer. So it is very important that we continue to study. It's very important that we continue to dive into these things. But what we wanted to do today was simply give you this design argument and sort of give you some ammunition as you go and talk to people. And I hope this is beneficial to you. Certainly leave any questions that you might have. Email us, text us. Let us know if there's something that we need to explain further. And we look forward. We're so excited. Cannot wait for that day when we can all get back together and worship together and be together again. Until then, we're going to continue to study and hope that this has been beneficial to you. Look forward to our Sunday morning Bible class at 9 a.m. on Sunday morning and our worship together at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning. Looking forward to that and can't wait to see you all hopefully very soon.